Right now, picture a caveman in your head. Go ahead, actually do it. There's a good chance you just imagine someone hunched over, nervous, glancing over his shoulder for the next lion or saber-tooth about to pounce. A fragile little creature, just barely surviving in a world stacked entirely against him. Huddled by a fire, hoping something bigger doesn't find him in the dark. Spending every waking hour worried about becoming somebody else's dinner. It's a comforting image, and it shows up everywhere. In cartoons, in documentaries, in the word caveman itself, which somehow always seems to mean victim rather than threat. It's also almost exactly backward. Here's the real question worth sitting with, one that should genuinely bother you a little. For most of the animal kingdom, tens of thousands of years ago, who was actually the thing to be afraid of? Because the evidence increasingly points to an answer that flips the whole picture on its head. And it starts by asking you to imagine one very specific, very bad afternoon, from the point of view of an animal the size of a school bus. An animal that has never once, in its entire life, had a genuine reason to feel small. Picture a mammoth. 12 feet at the shoulder, tusks the length of a grown man, capable of crushing a wolf's skull with a single lazy step. Matriarch of a herd that has crossed this exact stretch of tundra every season for as long as she can remember. For most of her life, almost nothing on the entire continent has been able to touch her. Lions test young calves and quickly learn to look elsewhere. Wolves shadow the herd's edges, but never seriously commit. The world, as far as she's ever known it, respects a clear and simple rule. Things her size do not get hunted successfully, only occasionally harassed. Then, one afternoon, without warning, roughly 20 small, upright, oddly persistent creatures appear at the edge of the herd, moving with a strange, deliberate purpose she's never seen before. And instead of running the way every sensible predator she's ever encountered eventually does, they simply keep coming. They don't stop when she charges, tusks lowered, the ground shaking under her weight, in a display that has ended every previous confrontation in her life within seconds. A move that has sent wolves and lions scattering for good every single time before this. A few scatter, then regroup almost immediately, as if her entire terrifying display barely registered. They don't stop when the herd tries to outrun them, because unlike a lion, which gives up after a short, explosive sprint and simply cannot maintain that pace, these creatures don't sprint at all. They jog. They jog for hours, tracking the herd's exact path across open ground with an unnerving, methodical patience. Occasionally hurling something sharp that draws blood from a distance far greater than any claw or tooth could reach. Patient in a way nothing in her prior experience has prepared her to understand or predict. By the time exhaustion finally catches up with the herd late in the day, muscles burning, lungs straining in the heat, calves stumbling to keep pace with mothers who can no longer help them, the 20 creatures are still coming, unhurried, barely even breathing hard. And for the first time in her life, the biggest animal on the continent understands, on some deep instinctive level, that she is not the one in control of what happens next. This isn't a fantasy scenario dreamed up for dramatic effect. It's a description built directly from a real hunting strategy called persistence hunting. And it's one of the most quietly terrifying tools evolution has ever handed to any species on this planet. Humans are, without much competition, the best long-distance runners in the entire animal kingdom, better even than horses or wolves over sufficient distance, for one very specific biological reason: sweating. Almost every other large mammal cools itself primarily by panting, which means it has to slow down or stop to release heat, especially in direct sun on open ground with nowhere to hide. And a panting animal moving at speed can only dump so much heat through its mouth and tongue before its core temperature climbs into dangerous territory. Humans cool themselves through millions of sweat glands spread across bare skin, largely hairless compared to most mammals, which means a human can keep moving hour after hour in conditions that would eventually cook almost anything else from the inside out. A pursued animal has to alternate between running and recovering, bursts of speed followed by desperate rest in whatever shade it can find. A human pursuer barely has to stop at all, simply maintaining a steady, relentless jog that never quite lets the prey's body temperature drop back down to a safe level. Trackers studying modern persistence hunters, including groups in the Kalahari Desert, who still practice this technique today, largely for cultural and ceremonial reasons, rather than daily survival, have documented hunts lasting anywhere from 2 to 6 hours, covering 20 miles or more across brutally hot terrain during the hottest part of the day. Deliberately chosen because heat stress works entirely in the hunter's favor. Ending with an animal so overheated and exhausted, it simply collapses, unable to run another step, organs straining, while the human chasing it is tired, but very much still standing, still capable of finishing the job with a single, well-placed strike. Now picture that same fundamental threat, but armed. In 1994, archaeologists working a coal mine in Schöningen, Germany, uncovered something that rewrote the entire timeline of organized human violence. A find that would eventually appear in textbooks and museum exhibits around the world. A set of wooden spears, roughly 300,000 years old by most current estimates, though the exact dating has been actively debated and refined by researchers as recently as 2025, found alongside the butchered remains of more than 10 horses at what appears to have been a lakeside ambush site. These weren't crude, accidental sticks snapped off a nearby tree. They were carefully balanced, front-weighted throwing weapons, shaped with a level of woodworking skill that surprised even the archaeologist who found them. The wood selected, seasoned, scraped, and sanded with clear intention, engineered specifically to be hurled with accuracy from a distance rather than simply jabbed at close range. Researchers who examined the site closely noted that hunting and killing more than 10 horses at a single location wasn't the work of one desperate individual improvising in the moment, a single lucky spear throw against a solitary animal. It pointed toward a coordinated group, working together with a shared plan, likely driving the animals toward the lake edge, where escape became difficult, and the herd could be trapped against the water, funneled and cut off, exactly the way a modern hunting guide might still plan an ambush today. Long before anything you'd call civilization, before writing, before agriculture, before even fully modern humans in the strictest sense, something in the genus Homo had already worked out how to design a purpose-built weapon and coordinate a group hunt against animals many times its own size and weight. That kind of coordinated pressure against genuinely massive animals isn't only theoretical. At a site called Mezyrich in modern-day Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an ancient settlement built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks. Dozens of individual animals' worth of material, structures deliberately engineered from skulls, jaws, and long bones, stacked and arranged with clear architectural intent. Researchers studying the site have debated exactly how many of those mammoths were actively hunted versus scavenged from animals that died of other causes over the years. A genuinely open methodological question. But the sheer scale of bone available at a single settlement site strongly suggests sustained, repeated success against an animal most modern people would never dream of approaching on foot, let alone bringing down with wood and stone. So how afraid exactly should the rest of the animal kingdom have been? A team of ecologists, led by Liana Zanet at Western University, decided to test something close to that exact question. Not on ancient animals, but on wildlife alive right now. In a study published in 2023, Zanet and her colleagues set up hidden waterproof cameras and speaker systems at watering holes across South Africa's Greater Kruger National Park, running day and night for months, and eventually gathering roughly 15,000 recorded videos for analysis. Then played recordings to 19 different mammal species. Ordinary human conversation recorded in the region's most commonly spoken local languages. The sounds of human hunting like gunshots and barking dogs. And for direct comparison, the growls and snarls of lions specifically communicating with each other rather than roaring, chosen deliberately to match the conversational tone of the human voice clips as closely as possible. The results were, in the researchers' own words, startling. A full 95% of species tested, including giraffes, leopards, hyenas, zebras, kudu, warthogs, elephants, and rhinoceroses, ran away or abandoned the watering hole entirely, more often and more quickly in response to ordinary human voices than in response to actual lions, widely considered the single most fearsome land predator on the continent. Not gunshots, not barking dogs. Just people talking normally, at a completely ordinary conversational volume. No shouting, no threat display of any kind, simply the sound of two people chatting. As Zanette put it afterward, humans kill medium-sized carnivores at roughly 5 times the rate other large predators do, and kill the large predators themselves at roughly 9 times that rate again. A level of lethality across essentially every size class simultaneously that no other single species on the planet comes close to matching. Numbers stark enough that her research group formally refers to humans as a super predator. A single species sitting so far above the rest of the food chain that most other animals have adjusted their entire behavior around simply never being caught near one. Here's what makes that finding so striking. None of the animals in that South African study had any direct personal history with the specific humans in the recordings. No individual bad encounter to remember and avoid. This wasn't a learned individual fear passed down through one close call. It's closer to something baked in at a species-wide level, an instinct so deep and so widespread that scientists studying it increasingly treat it less like ordinary caution and more like an evolved, hardwired response, the same general category of reflex that makes a mouse freeze at the passing shadow of a hawk without ever once being taught, by any parent or personal experience, what a hawk actually is, or what it's capable of doing. A warning written directly into the nervous system, rather than learned the hard way through trial and error. Which brings us to one of the most genuinely contested debates in all of paleontology, one that's been running, seriously, for over 60 years. Did human hunting actually help wipe out an entire generation of the largest animals that ever walked the Earth? Around the end of the last ice age, a staggering number of massive land animals disappeared within a relatively short geological window. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths the size of a small elephant, capable of standing upright to strip leaves from tall trees. Saber-toothed cats, enormous, short-faced bears, taller than a grizzly, standing on its hind legs, and possibly the largest land predator North America has ever seen. Dozens of other genera gone within a few thousand years. An extinction event with almost no equal anywhere else in the fossil record, outside of a handful of true global catastrophes. In 1967, geoscientist Paul Martin proposed what became known as the overkill hypothesis, arguing that as humans spread rapidly into new continents, they hunted these massive, slow-reproducing animals into extinction, with a speed some researchers have described as a blitzkrieg, a lightning war against megafauna that had never before encountered a predator anything like this one. Animals with no evolved fear response, ready-made for a species that hunted in coordinated groups, planned ahead, and simply refused to give up a chase. Critics have pushed back hard for decades, pointing out that solid archaeological kill sites directly linking humans to every single extinct species remain frustratingly rare across the fossil record, and arguing that dramatic climate swings at the end of the Ice Age offer a simpler, less human-centered explanation that doesn't require assuming small bands of hunters could really wipe out entire genera across 2 continents. But newer evidence has increasingly complicated that pushback. Radiocarbon dating studies published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that megafauna population declines line up remarkably closely, region by region, continent by continent, with the documented arrival of human hunters. First in Beringia, roughly 13 to 15,000 years ago, a land bridge crossing that opened an entire hemisphere of animals to a predator they'd never once encountered. Then across the contiguous United States, then South America. In almost exactly the staggered, wave-like sequence Martin's original model predicted decades before this data existed to test it. Separately, genetic analyses of the megafauna populations that did manage to survive into the modern era found that climate change alone couldn't fully explain the sharp population crashes visible in their DNA, especially over the last 75,000 years, a period when the timing of the steepest declines tracked human expansion far more consistently than it tracked any single climate signal, strongly implicating human hunting pressure as the more consistent driver across multiple, independent, unrelated lines of evidence. To be fair to the other side of this argument, most researchers today land somewhere in the middle, rather than picking a single clean villain. And it's worth resisting the temptation to flatten a genuinely complicated scientific debate into a simple headline. Climate change almost certainly weakened these massive species first, shrinking their habitat, fragmenting their populations, and stressing already vulnerable groups before a single spear was ever thrown at them. But a growing number of scientists now argue that human hunting, arriving right at that same vulnerable moment, may have been the deciding blow a species could have otherwise survived without. The final push against animals that climate change had already backed into a corner. Whichever side of that debate eventually wins out completely, if it ever does, one thing both camps already agree on without much argument. Humans showing up in a new ecosystem for the very first time was, at an absolute minimum, very bad news for anything large, slow, and unused to being hunted by something this patient. Now for the part nobody can directly prove, but that's genuinely worth imagining anyway, because it might be the most important part of this entire story. We'll never know exactly what went through the mind of any specific Ice Age predator the first time it crossed paths with a coordinated human hunting party. Animals don't leave written records of their own terror. No diary entry describing the exact moment a species realized the rules had changed. But it's a completely reasonable, evidence-grounded guess based on exactly the kind of fear response modern researchers are still measuring in South African wildlife today. That something in the instinctive wiring of large carnivores and herbivores alike shifted, gradually, generation after generation, every single time a group of these strange, tireless, weapon-carrying primates showed up somewhere new on the map. A cave lion encountering humans for the first time had no evolutionary template for a predator that didn't tire, didn't hunt alone, and kept coming back with sharpened wood even after being wounded or driven off once already. A mammoth herd had never needed to fear anything that could out-endure it, rather than simply outrun or outfight it in a single direct confrontation. Every single animal on a landscape humans entered for the first time was, in a very real sense, facing a threat its own instincts hadn't finished updating to handle yet, right up until, generation by generation, through the harshest possible teacher, they finally did. None of this means every single encounter ended in a kill, or that ancient humans strolled through the Ice Age invincible and unafraid, immune to danger simply because they eventually became the deadliest thing on the landscape. Big cats, hyenas, and other genuine predators absolutely killed early humans, sometimes entire hunting parties caught off guard or overwhelmed. And the fossil record includes plenty of human bones bearing unmistakable predator tooth marks to prove it. A sobering reminder that being the eventual apex predator didn't mean being invincible along the way. A spear thrown from a safe distance still required real courage from whoever threw the first one at an animal that could kill them in a single strike if the throw went wrong, or if the wounded creature turned and charged instead of fleeing. This isn't a story about ancient humans facing no danger, walking through a hostile world with nothing to lose. It's a story about which direction the fear increasingly flowed over time, generation after generation, and how quickly that direction seems to have reversed once humans figured out that endurance, coordination, and a sharpened stick, working together, could outperform claws, size, and raw speed almost every single time it actually mattered. So the next time you picture a caveman, maybe swap out the image of a nervous, hunted little creature checking over his shoulder and picture instead something closer to the animal actually checking over its own shoulder. A mammoth catching a strange, unfamiliar scent on the wind, and, for reasons its instincts can't fully explain yet, deciding to move a little faster than usual, well before it has any concrete reason to believe danger is actually near. A caution baked in by countless ancestors who waited too long to feel it themselves. That fear didn't come from nowhere. Modern wildlife is still, right now, in South Africa and everywhere else humans have ever set foot on this planet, quietly running the exact same, very old, very reasonable program their ancestors first installed the hard way. One bad encounter, one lost herd member, one relentless afternoon at a time. If you liked learning that the gentle caveman you've been picturing your whole life was actually one of the most effective predators the planet has ever produced, that's basically the whole channel. Digging past the comforting version of prehistory everyone assumes is true to find the far stranger, far more dangerous reality underneath it. New episodes go up regularly, so subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one.